All right, see you soon. Well, welcome to Black History Conversations. I'm Liz Millman from Learning Links International, and at the moment we've got with us Garrick Prayogg from Justice for Windrush Generations, who's going to be telling us about the work that he's been doing, the very important work. And we've also got Rose Johnson joining us as well at present. So we're starting a little bit early, so I'm sure other people will join us as we go along. I'm just going to start for the last time in this series. What a wonderful thing to say, because I'm in Australia at the moment. So, uh, oops, a daisy. There we are. Just get my recording right. So I'm in Australia, so I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I live at present, and have been here for quite a while now. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So this is the way that we start any session or meeting here. But also, because we're Black History Conversations, we also acknowledge the injustice of the actions taken by the British and the other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the continents of North and South America. And in addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and the many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonialisation and ongoing exploitation. And we acknowledge that this has resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples, cultures, and I have to say here in Australia, environment. We're in the International Decade of People for African Descent, and in our next season, season 13, we're going to be exploring more about what's been achieved during this decade and what the next lot of plans are. But now we're just going to let you know what's been going on with our Windrush series on Black History Conversations. We had a very interesting session with Rudy Page. He was in Jamaica last year on the 75th anniversary, and we talked through some of the plans for future Jamaican events, and certainly building up to the next year or so, there are ideas for um, having a replica of the Waterloo um, uh, monument um, on the waterfront in Kingston. That was very interesting. Then we had a week where we focused on the importance and brilliant work that Jamaican teachers have done in the UK. So Rose was particularly proactive here, finding some great colleagues to talk with us, and that was a really good session. Bill Hearn joined us to talk about his book on the Windrush passengers last week, and we were also joined by Levi Lawrence, and actually it was his sister, Adele. She joined us to remember their father, who was on the Windrush as well. So it's amazing stories. And today we're going to hear from Garrick Prayogg. And he's going to be talking about the 65 countries of the Commonwealth and the British Overseas Territory that make up that we need to recognise people who are caught in the Windrush issues, as we call them, the Home Office scandal issues, could come from any of these countries or territories. Next week, we're going to welcome the nurses from the Caribbean. We've got two speakers who'll be joining us and telling us about their experience from the Association of Jamaican Nurses. And then the following week is going to be really quite a challenge, because it's great that Dr. Winita Cox is going to present the findings of the Windrush research that she's been a part of over the last 3 years. But we're also going to be doing this as a hybrid opportunity, and we'll be actually be in Rhyl Fire Station, North Wales, doing a Windrush Day activity, and Black History Conversations is going to be live from there. So that'll be challenging. And then we move on after that, and we go back to our usual varied programme. And Daniel Johnson's going to be joining us now. He's a very capable, able young man, and he's going to be talking about transferable life skills through Black music. And then we've got opportunities in July for other people to join us. So really looking forward to that. Okay, so Garrick, I found your photo on LinkedIn and recognise that you've got a background in social justice, um, activist campaigning for inclusion, equal minority rights and human rights, and a wide range of experiences, including policy development in public, private and third sectors, regeneration, youth development, children and family support, as well as housing, marketing, business development and African Caribbean support, which is a big focus of your work now, but also community regeneration and capacity building, as well as the work you do on mental health equalities in the health services and so many other things, I think, Garrick. So I'm going to stop sharing in a moment, but I'm just going to go on to the next slide so you can see that I've transferred the information
Excellent.
that you
Yeah.
sent to me onto a PowerPoint. So
Yeah.
I hope we'll be able to go through that a bit at a
Yes.
time. If I
Yeah.
do the PowerPoint first, and then you
Excellent.
can.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
But anyway, it's great that that we're welcoming you, Garrick, and perhaps you'd just like to introduce yourself this
Yeah,
time and
sure, sure.
when,
Well,
what
thank you
you're
very
doing.
much for the opportunity of presenting during this period. This is a period that we consider leading up to the Windrush story and history. And I've always mentioned the fact that I'm a second generation descendant from the Windrush generation. And only a few weeks ago, Liz, I learned a little bit more about the family history because my mother was here for 4 weeks from Canada. And I didn't know that we had relatives who arrived in the UK 1949 and 51 or 52. I only knew from my parents actually arriving in 57. So that was useful information. I didn't know I had that early connection. This subject matter is quite interesting and important because there is so much misunderstanding about Windrush. And if you put that slide up again, Liz, on the PowerPoint, we're talking about the global situation, Windrush affecting 65 countries. The global circle there is what Justice for Windrush Generation use to highlight, that's our logo, to highlight that, you know, Windrush is not a Caribbean only issue. And the Commonwealth flags also help people to appreciate that Windrush goes beyond the Caribbean. If I remember my geography from school days, I think there's about 25, either 23, 25 Caribbean islands. I don't know if there are any more, but certainly the Caribbean doesn't really represent a global issue. And we also
Gary, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
I do apologise. I wasn't able to transfer your exact logo globe, and
That's
this was the
fine.
only one I could find. And this one actually has countries other than the
Yeah,
Commonwealth,
no,
but
that's
just to
okay.
give the
Yeah,
indication. But
it's
we
just
put the Commonwealth flags there. They're
yeah,
all common.
it's just for people to see, you know, images. It said a picture tell 1,000 words. So, you know, when people see flags representing country, they're drawn to that country that they belong to. And Justice for Windrush Generation, we have a banner, a 10-foot banner that we use when we go out and talk to different organization. And that banner does have all those flags so that people can actually recognize, which country they belong to. And so it's really just to emphasize the point that Windrush is global. Okay? And the reason why that is important is because the narrative that's in the public domain doesn't give that impression, nor does it focus on any other country except the original people coming off the Empire Windrush ship back in 1948. And it's also good to mention that the ship, HMS Windrush, docked in Tilbury on the 21st, but due to politics, they didn't embark till the next day, the 22nd. So the 22nd has been adopted as the Windrush Day. So that's important. And it's also, it's interesting when you mention that, because when you think about inviting people to come, but then when the ship arrives, there are political issues. We don't want these people to come off the ship. Can we take them to another place? Or can we take some and take them to another place? So those were the sort of conversation that was going on in Parliament at the time. We always emphasize the point that due to both the politician of the Labour Party and the politician of the Conservative Party have been heavily involved in forming immigration laws and policies. And when you talk about Windrush, we're talking about immigration. And these laws were put in place to control the number of people coming into the country. And in particular, more importantly, people of black skin, darker skin. We sometimes use the term black and brown people. So they wanted to control those numbers. And so the Windrush situation didn't just happen, all the foundation was laid out by successful government prior to that situation. So when 1948 arrived and these people came to the UK, then there were lots of issues about, first of all, where will they live? They had to find their own places to live. And I lived in Clapham during the 70s, and that was the location for the first generation in Clapham, here raid shelter. And so Lambeth became the local authority. And hence we have Windrush Square in Brixton. So we can see the history associated with Windrush. And when we talk about the history, we're not talking about separate history or separate Black history. We're talking about British history. And when we have a conversation, we need to make sure we express that we're talking about British history. And in the House of Lords, it was mentioned that it is a British shameful scandal that took place. Yeah? That's what the Lords have said. And quite right, that is the case. So what we're focusing on this afternoon is to shift the narrative from Caribbean to global. And when we say global, we're talking about people from across the world. So we know that there are only 54 Commonwealth countries. Can you put that slide up for
Yeah.
me, Liz, in terms of
Okay.
the flags on the country? So there's
Okay. First of all, I put the strategic aims, which you
yes,
kind
yes,
of covered.
that's
But
good.
I don't know if you want to talk that through again.
Yeah. So let me. I think this is good. So I'll follow the slides as they are.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
So Justice for Windrush Generation, our strategic aims, and there's a couple mentioned here, to campaign for change for the Windrush compensation scheme, to raise public awareness about Windrush for the wider understanding about Windrush, that it's not just a Caribbean issue, to develop links with organizations which share our aim for justice and equity. So we're working with other campaign organizations. And that is important because nobody can actually do this in isolation. We have to connect up with other organizations that's doing similar work around these issues, around just social justice and equity. To develop an outreach program to reach a wider audience, and that is about public education. So we will go out to different cities and we will engage with community in those cities, whether they're from a church community or whether they're from older people community, seniors, etc. We will go out and engage with them. In other words, we're taking the information out to people. To change the narrative in the public domain. And this is crucial we do this because when we have a conversation about Windrush, we have to continue to say to people, Windrush is not a Caribbean issue. It's much bigger than Caribbean. And when we have conversation with particular communities, for example, people from India, people from Asia, people from Africa, they don't see themselves as part of this Windrush generation. But when you start to have the conversation about the first generation and subsequent generation and how Britain recruited people to come and work in the NHS, etc., the railway and other important industry, transportation, then they start to understand a little bit more about, well, my grandfather came in the 70s, from Africa because Idi Amin had said all these Asians need to come out. Okay, so they start to make some connection with the global issue. Until you start having those conversations, people still believe it is a Caribbean issue. And it doesn't help when people continue to see old images of people coming off the Windrush ship back in 48 and the interviews that took place and the conversation was only about Caribbean people. And as many Africans tell me that they didn't come on a ship, it doesn't really matter how you arrive in the UK. What's important is whether you arrive from a Commonwealth country or whether you arrive from a non-Commonwealth country, and I'll say a little bit about that later on, because you've got the Commonwealth country and you also have the overseas territories. That gives you 65 countries in total. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So the Home Office produce information to help people to rectify their status and to get documentation. And what we say to people, the first thing you would do is to check your status. And we have guidance for people to do that. So I put this as facts. Windrush is a global issue affecting 65 countries or nations. The Home Office lists all 65 on the Windrush Justice Guidance. That is taken from the Home Office. The information that's out in the public domain, everybody can access that information. And here is British Commonwealth countries, and we also have a Commonwealth flag. And in Liverpool, I'm a member of the Liverpool Commonwealth Association representing Jamaica. And there are other people representing their own individual countries, etc. And that is the only Commonwealth organization that exists in Liverpool, as far as we know, no other exists in different cities. Okay? And people do contact us about that. So you notice the countries actually go in alphabetical order from A to Z. And one of the things that we always emphasize is, when did you arrive? Your parent or your grandparent? When did your family arrive in the UK? So for Commonwealth country, you need to arrive in the country before 1973, whether yourself, your parent, or your grandparent. That is very important. That is the eligibility criteria to check against the Home Office that you can apply to the scheme for support, free support. If you don't fall into those dates, then you're outside the Windrush scheme, and your issue and query will be an immigration query specific. Okay? Now, apart from Commonwealth country people arriving before 1973, the guidance also states that you can arrive from any other country by the 31st of December, 1988. We always say by the 1st of January, 89, because only a day is difference. And you must be settled in the UK. So we have two dates for eligibility to Windrush scheme. Commonwealth country must be before 1973. And for the rest of the world, by December or the 1st of January, 1989, right? And you must be settled. Okay. Now, for those people,
sorry,
see these nations that's listed there, some of us probably didn't even know that these countries existed. Okay? So take, for example, the Falklands. Yeah, we knew about the Falkland War, yeah, when Britain was fighting the Falkland War during Mrs. Thatcher's reign. We also know about a lot of the other countries, Mauritius, Montserrat, Malta, Maldives. But there's some countries that we didn't know about.
And there's more. This is it. This goes through to Z.
Yes, yeah. So, you know, just looking at the named countries, St. Helena, for example, I think that's the place that had a volcano some years ago, and people had to leave the island. But all of these countries that is listed there, if they're not Commonwealth, they are British overseas territories. So that is why the Home Office has listed 65 countries. Okay? So, for example, we don't see anybody from Sri Lanka coming forward to get their status rectified or to seek any compensation. We don't see anybody from Samoa coming forward. We don't see anyone from Singapore, Seychelles coming forward. So South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, I didn't even know where these places exist or where they were located until I started to look at the map and see where they are, because I hadn't heard of some of them. That's it. See? So here we have global Commonwealth nation, members, state, former member, and then you have neither. So to put it in a nutshell, the conversation that we need to have when we talk about Windrush is that Windrush is global. Windrush is global, affecting people from 65 countries. And when you start to have that conversation, it changes the narrative about Windrush being a Caribbean issue only. And the other important thing, that from the 70s through the 80s, people been coming to the UK for employment, for work, etc. I know, for example, a lot of Kenyan nurses came to the UK in the late 70s. And we have a big community of Kenyan in Liverpool community. But people would not have this information readily available to them. And so the work that Windrush Generation is doing, both when we go out to communities and what we do when people contact us via our Zoom platform, is to re-emphasize the point about Windrush being global, and that even if you don't come from a Commonwealth country, the important thing is the date you arrive in the UK and settle. Now, after 1989, if you arrive in the UK 1991, 92, 2000, the Windrush compensation scheme is not applicable to you. You cannot use it to rectify your status. You would need to see an immigration lawyer to resolve your issue. So the compensation scheme was created to address the issue of documentation. Get your documentation to prove you have the legal right to be here in the UK. And the first thing we say to people is check your documentation. There's also another important thing that we always emphasize, that when families are checking their status, they also need to know what was the status of their grandparents and their parents. Now, why is that important? There are many Windrush generation who back in the 70s and 80s refused to be naturalized. They didn't want to pay the money to be naturalized because they felt, I am already British. Why should I pay to be naturalized? So they did not get the documentation that was required. So having a conversation with your family, you would know whether or not they did resolve their status. And if they did not, it will have an impact on yourself because they didn't have a status, you won't have a status. Okay. The other thing that's important, many people think if you're born in the UK, you have automatic right to be British. And I don't need to worry about papers. That is not the case. Okay. Again, when independent country, when Commonwealth country gain their independence, they lose their British status and they revert back to their own nationality. Let me use Jamaica as an example. 1962, Jamaica became independent. So prior to that, they were British. Had a British passport, British. After 62, you become the national of your country, Jamaican national, with their own passport. There are some countries that do not permit dual nationality. You have to choose one or the other. India is one of those countries. And there are people who still have dual nationality. And there are those who had to give up one to gain another. So what we emphasize to families and individuals is for them to have conversation about their family history and whether or not their family had rectified their status. And if they did, that's fine. If they didn't, there will be issues. And we had a situation in Preston about 4 years ago when a 15-year-old girl wanted to go on a school trip. And she was asked by the teacher to bring her passport in so that they could do the relevant check, etc. She did not have a passport. She was born here, but she didn't have a passport. Her mother was born here, and her mother did not have a passport. What we found out, her grandmother didn't rectify her status. She didn't have any document. And out of that situation came Preston Windrush. The organization was formed out of that situation in Preston. Then we found out there were other children and families in that situation. And the mother didn't know because her mother had passed on. So she couldn't go and ask any question. Yeah? And this is another issue. If your parents or grandparents is not alive, do you know what their situation was, what their status was? And for many people born in the UK who don't think they need any documentation until they want to travel on a holiday and they apply for a passport in the usual way, and it comes back, we cannot give you a passport. And they didn't know that is possible. And the reason why they could not issue a passport to that individual, because their parents did not have a British status. So it's very important that we check our family line about what status we have or don't have. So I've given you 2 dates. Commonwealth people, they must be here in the UK by 1973, from any other country by the 1st of January 89. But after 89, the Windrush scheme is not applicable to you. Now, you may be surprised to learn that the EU national have used the Windrush scheme to rectify their status after Brexit. because they were here during the period, the dates that I've just referred to. They were here. So they came under that scheme. And when you look at the Home Office fact sheet, there are more EU national who have used this scheme than Jamaicans and the rest of the world. That is a fact. So it just goes to show that when the scheme was designed to resolve the issue that came out of 2018 scandal, and we always refer to as the Home Office scandal, not the Windrush scandal, the Home Office scandal, when that broke in 2018, nobody knew it would affect European people because it was just a black issue. Okay? We only discovered later on through Brexit that they could apply and use the scheme to resolve their status. And they have done. Almost 5,000 in numbers have done so. And all this information is on the Home Office website and guidance. And the Home Office do a listing of all the countries that have been successful in making application to the scheme. They're all listed. They produce what they call fact sheets. Yeah? So people can go and have a look and see, yes, which country has actually used the scheme, how many people from that country have used the scheme, yeah, whether they're from India, whether they're from Ghana, whether they're from Nigeria, whether they're from Jamaica, they're all listed there. But the highest number is EU. So truly, Windrush is global. Only through our campaigning in the last couple of years that we've pushed the Home Office to start promoting the scheme as a global scheme. Because prior to that, there was no information that it was a global scheme. They just kept it quiet. Okay? So now in the guidance page, yeah, we've actually improved that. So now when people go on the Home Office page, immediately it will talk about, you know, Commonwealth countries, and it will list the 65 countries, okay, so that people can see. Yeah, we were the one that forced them to do that. They wouldn't do it. There's also an issue where the Home Office do not promote this information overseas in those Commonwealth countries. Okay? And we also have challenged them on that issue. And as a result of challenging them on that issue, they did do a little promotion in Jamaica for a couple of weeks because we heard about it. We've been monitoring. They did 1 week in Barbados. They did 1 week in Nigeria. But the 65 countries, they haven't done that. It's been selective where they go and put a little article in the local paper or something on the radio, because we've suggested to them the best way to do it is to use the local newspaper, use radio, and also use organization on the ground to get information out. Now, last year, for the 75th anniversary, Professor Livermore visited Jamaica during this period. And what he did was to meet with heads of government out there and to have conversation about Windrush compensation scheme, and also what is the Jamaica government doing. Now, we also know that many Jamaicans were deported from the UK back to Jamaica, and the UK government gave the Jamaican government some money for helping to resettle these individuals. And we still don't know what has happened with these individuals. What we do know that Professor Livermore have confirmed now you can get information about Windrush from all Jamaica library service. So you can go to the library service in any of the parish and you can get access to the Home Office information online. And that came about as a result of the visit that took place for the 75th anniversary. And we would like that model in other countries across the 65 countries. And we've suggested that to the Home Office that should follow that model. We don't know what they're doing with that information.
Garrick, I'm just going to interrupt you because I did a couple of other slides to add to the information about applying, and I think it would be relevant to share those now. This is taken directly off the government website, saying that if you're applying to the Windrush compensation scheme, you may be able to claim if you suffered losses because you couldn't show you had the right to live in the UK. And perhaps in a moment you might say a little bit about the sort of losses people did experience, because that's important.
Yeah, that is very important.
Losses can be things like not being able to work, finding a place to live, or get health treatment. And also can include immigration action like detention or removal from the UK.
That's right.
So for these wrongs, this is why the compensation scheme was set up.
Absolutely.
A little bit like the wrongs that were inflicted on the post office people, and they are having to seek compensation as well. So do you want to speak about that next?
Keep that slide there, Liz. So basically, Windrush compensation, there are two schemes. There's one scheme to get documentation. We call that rectifying your status. So that's one scheme. And then the compensation is a second bit. That's two schemes. You cannot jump to compensation without the status. And
so this is a status document.
This is the one. And so children who arrive in the UK who did not have a passport because they arrive as minor, for example, with their family member, or in some cases even travel on other family member passport, didn't require any documentation. So these are individuals who would have grown up, started to work in the UK, have a family, have their children, etc., and then knew nothing about any issue until 2018 when the scandal broke and people were a bit confused. I've lived there for 30, 40 years, and suddenly I'm having to just prove that you have the right to be here in the UK. And so the first thing was about getting your document. And we have an example of individual who have worked in the NHS for 25 years, but in 2012, the employer was asked to check that your employees have got the right to work in the UK. So can you please ask them to bring their passport in so that you can do the check? So in other words, employers and other public sector become immigration officers to do this check. Now, that individual who arrived here as a child and grew up and got married and have their children and started to work, they didn't have any documentation. And the only time they would need documentation if they want a passport to travel. Yeah. So now suddenly in 2018, people heard about the Windrush and, you know, you have to prove your status. And people is wondering, well, why? Because I was British. I came here when Britain was ruling my country, and suddenly I'm not British anymore. They didn't understand. So what the Home Office have done through the scheme is to provide a means of how individual can document to show, to get the relevant document to show they have the legal right to be in the UK. And that is why this date is important. You must arrive yourself, your parents, or your grandparents from a Commonwealth country before 1973. That's the first test in the guidance, yeah, to be eligible. And we always emphasize that, right? That date is important to be eligible for the scheme. And the second date is if you arrive from any other country, yeah, by the 31st of December, 88, or the 1st of January, 89. And for any other country, that will include list of those countries that we put up previously, and Southeast Asia and those countries, people who don't think that Windrush is part of their plight. They would fall within the any other country. You came to the UK from any country before this date. And you
Garrick, can I ask you a question then? So if you came to the UK from Russia before 1988, that date, are you eligible to get a document to show your right to be in the UK?
Well, if Russia is part of the Commonwealth.
No, it says in the guidance from any country.
Yes,
so
yes.
Does that
yes.
mean anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world, because this was always the issue that we challenge the Home Office. So you've got the Commonwealth country and then any other country, yeah, by the date mentioned. So yes, the answer to your question would be yes, because
it seems discriminatory that if you came from the Commonwealth, you had to be here before 73.
Yeah.
But if you came from any other country, it's the end of 88.
Yes, and that is why the EU, remember I said the EU used the scheme to rectify their status after Brexit, right? So these were EU people who were living in the UK, right, in the 80s. So they were eligible to apply to the scheme.
Okay. Well, we're just going to pause for a moment, Garrick, because June Elizabeth's arrived now and she's popped her hand up and she wanted to come in. So you've given us so much information, Garrick. That's just amazing. June Elizabeth, how are you?
Sorry I was late. I didn't realise I had a Royal Historical seminar on publishing, and it just finished. So yeah, the 1988 you can get naturalisation. I don't know if I missed Garrick talking about naturalisation.
Okay, Garrick, come back on that then.
Yeah. So what I mentioned is that a lot of the Windrush people who were here in the 70s and 80s who refused to pay the money for the naturalization, and some said, well, why should I pay to get naturalized? See? Now, naturalization, you have to pay a fee. Citizenship, you don't pay nothing. You know, it's there. Yeah. The EU people, as far as I know, did they ever get naturalized, June Elizabeth? They didn't pay anything to be naturalized because we had free movement across Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yes. But it gets a bit complex, right? Because I've had to have a lot of different meetings with the immigration.
Mm.
And I even had a client that came 74, and I had a client that was born 89.
Mm.
And when the client was born, the mum and dad were not married, and only one parent had British citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
But today he rang me and he got his status, and she
Good.
got her status Easter, because she
Mm.
was like on the border.
Mm.
Because I put to them that in the 70s, do you know when it was you became, it didn't have to be 21, when it was 18? Do you know what year
18.
that was? Do you know what year that was? I don't know, but I
Mm.
said to them, when she came, she was still a minor.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was 17, and she went to college, and she's been here ever since, never left the country. So I managed to get her, but initially she was supposed to pay for a naturalization.
Mm.
She
Mm.
couldn't afford it. Yeah. And
Mm.
then she qualified as a nurse, but because she didn't have a citizenship or a naturalization, she couldn't get the qualification. So she's been
Yes.
working as a auxiliary ever since.
Yeah.
So, she got her citizen biometrics, and this morning at 8 o'clock, her son rang me to say he got his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fantastic. Can I just introduce June Elizabeth? She's another of the Windrush advocates who's been doing fantastic work. So thank you for coming in on those points, June Elizabeth, and congratulations on the achievements that you're making as you support people who are going through these claiming processes, which are so complex, it seems.
Yes, thank you.
I'm lost.
I just wanted to say, the people that I'm supporting now, I supported their grandparents in 1980 when the Nationality Bill was amended. I went all over the country and filled up their citizenship. So, you know, I've been going quite a long time now. And when Priti Patel had 41 nationwide Home Office Windrush ambassadors, I was one of the 41. But our role was just to signpost people and promote the Windrush schemes, as Gareth has really said about the schemes. But I saw a gap in the services, so I took on a caseload while I was a Windrush ambassador, because I could. Yeah, so a lot of people said, how come you got a caseload? But I was able to do that. You know.
Okay, thanks very much, June Elizabeth. Let's just let Garrick wrap up what he wanted to say. So we've got those other slides, Garrick.
Yes, yes. If you just put the other couple of
I'll put
slides
that back up again.
Please,
Okay, so this is the, where were we? Well, this is the one where you've got to get your documentation showing your right to be in the UK,
right,
and then presumably.
And what's important, you raise a point about compensation. You see, the Home Office used terminology, if you suffer loss or you've been impacted. Now, those words, what those words mean is that because that individual did not have the documentation when their employer asks for the documentation to bring your passport in, etc., because they did not have those, they lost their job. And as a consequence of losing their job, then of course they would lose the ability to pay their mortgage, and homelessness and all the other things will impact on that individual and also the family. But there's a whole list of other things that we use to show losses, you see. So, for example, you mentioned, about detention. So people can be detained in an immigration detention place for a period of time. People can also be detained, and we always stress this because people don't often think about this as a detention. When you travel out to the UK and you're coming back in at the airport, where immigration officers is doing your check on your passport, and they ask you to come over here to this room, and it's like a private little interview, etc. And anything over 25-30 minutes, you can then claim for being detained. So if you were held there for 45 minutes, on your claim, you would put that down that you've been detained at the airport for that period of time. There are other things that you can claim for. The most important is the impact on life, how all of this has impacted you, on yourself, both your emotional, psychological, and physical self. And then there's a list of other things. For example, you could not travel because, you know, your daughter or your son graduation, and you could not travel to that place. And, you know, you could not access public services, such as local authority housing, such as, you know, even opening a bank account, such as, you know, a driving license. There's a whole list of things that, you know, you're asked, you know, did you suffer any loss against this? And then one of the things that we stress in relation to a claim is that often an individual don't really think about all the things that has happened to them until maybe an advocate like June Elizabeth start to speak to them and ask them questions, and things will come back to mind, because we're talking about issues that has happened over a number of years. It could have been 30 years ago. It could have been 40 years ago. These things have happened to this individual. And when you start to have the conversation, the advocates start to have the conversation, you're helping the client to get a good understanding and get a historic perspective on their situation. And out of that, you'll be able to identify all the different elements of the claim. And one individual may have seven different heads of claim on their claim form. Another person may only have 2 or 3 or 4. You see, it's about how you've been impacted, what loss you have suffered. And the other thing that's important, we also have to give some evidence about you know, what loss is. And you have to present your information using the guidance to make sure that you are putting the information on paper, so that the caseworkers, when they read this information, that they get a good understanding of what has happened to you. In other words, you have to tell your story, you know, in details on paper. And sometimes you would need to confirm things like, you know, what date did you lose your job? So you said to us, you know, you lost your job on this date. Well, what date was it? And since you lose your job, what have you been doing? Have you had any other job? And all this thing you have to put on paper. It's not just a matter of just saying, well, yes, this has happened to me, a one-liner, and that is they're not happy with that. They want, you know, as much information as possible about your situation, your claim, what has happened to you, and as far as you can, what evidence you can put forward. Now, there's some evidence that you do not need to worry about, such as, you know, paying income tax through, you know, the government system will allow the Home Office to identify you as a taxpayer. You know, national insurance was collected, pension was collected, all this stuff. Yeah, they can evidence themselves. But there are other things that you will need to, as far as you can, give as much information about that situation. And it's on, you know, what they call evidence of probabilities. In other words, 51%. You know, is this feasible? If we're convinced it's feasible, then yes, we will accept that. If not, I'm sorry.
That's incredible. Right, let me just go back then, because this is the second phase then. So if you first of all make sure you've got your documentation sorted.
Check your status first.
Get your status first, and then you look at the compensation, which you've been explaining about.
Yes.
So here are the things.
And you notice
that
it says there,
on the website.
if you suffer losses, these are key words. If you suffer losses because you could not show you had a right to live in the UK, you did not have the necessary document that was required as evidence. So as a result of not having it, you've been impacted.
Yeah, and that evidence that was required was after the change in the law in 2012, when you had to be able to prove your status as a British citizen, both for work, for housing, and for the health service.
Yes.
So people were discriminated against, could possibly have been discriminated against wrongly
absolutely
over those years. And so it took 6 years before the scandal broke that this just wasn't right. I also took this off the website as well. This is the last of the PowerPoint. To restate
and this is the eligibility. See, this is part of the eligibility criteria, and we always say to individual, right, you have to fit into this, and if you're outside of this, then the Windrush scheme does not apply to you. And it's important. The dates are important. You came to the UK from a Commonwealth country before 1973. That would be yourself, your parents, or your grandparents. And then from any other country before the 31st of December 88 and are now settled.
And was there a particular reason? Because it seems to me that there's a discriminatory issue here, that Commonwealth people, they've got less, that's a different date to any other country, which I mentioned before. So I don't understand that.
It gets a little complex in this sense, because we're dealing with the 1971 Immigration Act that was acted in 73. Okay, so since 1948, there's been different pieces of immigration law, and so for example, there were people who were living in the UK, settled. They then leave the UK to travel abroad to visit a family or to look after a sick individual, and 2 years lapse, and they could not re-enter the UK because the Immigration Law 71 states people who had indefinite leave to remain, and that was common, indefinite leave to remain, they had 2 years to return back to the UK, otherwise they'll be locked out. And as a result of this, thousands of people are locked out of the UK. Only a few months ago, Richard Black, a gentleman, had returned to the UK after 40 years of exile. He could not come back to the UK because he was locked out, part of the 2-year rule.
That's true. Okay, we've got June Elizabeth wanting to make an additional comment here, if that's all right. Please. Is that okay?
Please.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to say, because I came in late, one of the losses also can be of your health. And, if you suffered stress, most people suffered stress when they, and anxiousness, anxiety. These are some of the things in the guidance, which everybody that's applying, they suffered some kind of anxiety or stress, trauma against their health. And that is part of claiming the compensation as well.
Yes. And we also know that there are individuals who have ended up in a mental institution as a result of what has happened to them. We know of family members who are in a mental institution for the last 20 years as a result of what has happened, their experience with Windrush.
Understandable and really, really awful. Garrick, you've explained all this so carefully to us. I'm going to ask if anybody else, I don't know whether Rose or Earl have got any questions or points you want to raise, but well, you hear it again and it's just awful. One of the things that I'm very unsure about, and well, that I'm perplexed about, that's a better word, is that 1 million white British citizens were given the opportunity with a very reduced fee of £10 to come here to Australia, and I'm not sure what the regulation, what the pattern was going to South Africa and other countries, but specifically white British people. This is after the war in the 1950s and 60s, and they were referred to as £10 POMs, but they had to be white families without anybody with a disability. And at a time when it's said that Britain was in need of workers and so had invited workers to come from places like Jamaica. So that to me is pretty inexplicable, other than assuming that it's a racist perspective, that wanting to be able to maintain countries like Australia with a white British-based population. Later they did extend that to other parts of Europe, but the Australia had a white Australia policy.
Yes.
And so that was what was trying to happen. So we see, you can look at what we call the Windrush story in that context.
It's interesting you mention Australia, Liz, because you can see the colonial system and the way that the European, and in particular Britain, were thinking during the Commonwealth period. In other words, if they were to populate this land, in time, this land population would multiply, and of course, the original people, right, would decrease while this land multiply and become whiter, as it were. And you would see a pattern, not just in Australia, you see a pattern also in Canada. And, you know, it's always amazed me when you think about what European has done, and it's not just Britain, European have done across the world, and you see a pattern establish itself in terms, you know, I listen to LBC phone in on a regular basis, and one gentleman was saying that, one moment, Liz, somebody just speak, somebody's at the door, just speak while I just do this.
That's fine. I think one of the other things that I'd like to speak about, and then Rose will get you coming in, is that the way that the term Windrush is used. Now, if we take the pure use of Windrush, the Empire Windrush, and that particular journey, that's one story, and that's been researched very well, and that story has been told very well. And in terms of the history, if you like, our shared history, then that story of that ship and the other people who came from other parts of the British Empire, we can understand that. And the Windrush Day is an opportunity given by the government, almost excuse me, as a way of apologising for what happened, a recognition that this shouldn't have happened. Well, it's very, very Caribbean focused. So no wonder there's issues not understanding that people who came from any Commonwealth country, and you're saying, in fact, any other country, it's a much, much wider thing. And these things now are getting confused. And then the terminology of calling anybody who had parents from the Caribbean, and this is specific because the Windrush Generations term applies to people who've got Caribbean heritage, and recognizing their achievements. And while we had a meeting with the fire service in Rhyl, where we're going to celebrate Windrush Day, or we're going to recognise Windrush Day, and there was a real confusion over the aims. So that's why I'm raising those points now. But before you answer, Garrick, let's have Rose come in.
Yes.
Well, you will remember, Garrick, that last week I was expressing that very confusion. And I appreciate that, because we can't change that term now. We're going to just make sure we internationalize it. In the way that you've described. There is still a struggle to to understand it because of what Liz has just said. And one of the things that I should have known, but it hadn't surfaced as clearly as it did when you were speaking, and that is, as I was born British in Jamaica, for example, before independence, I assumed that I could count that, although I did all the naturalization. Of course, I wasn't stupid, because you just did it, you know. But I had assumed that my Britishness was sat alongside my Jamaican. When I got my Jamaican passport, I thought I could also get my British passport because I was born British. And a lot of us felt that, and indeed probably still feel that, because my parents came up on the black, British and Commonwealth passport. And lots of people I interviewed for my books also had their old British passport. And so it does, there is confusion. And you're saying immediately you got independence, the country got independence, you lost your Britishness. And I think that's quite a difficult one to understand. Because if you're born, I take the example of America. If you're born in America, you are automatically endowed with American citizenship. It used to be the case in the UK that if you were born in the UK, you had UK citizenship. I know the various immigration laws change for all sorts of obvious purposes, which frankly, you can see it, and some of your earlier input reinforce that, which is that, we left the Windrush ship for a day because all these black people are on there, and it wasn't just black people, of course. So it's been there in terms of, post-war stuff where Churchill, in the papers that were then opened 50 years later or whatever, how many years later, you realize that politically the leadership didn't want us.
No.
They wanted the others, and Liz's point about the whites, they wanted those, but they, from New Zealand, Australia, from Canada, but they didn't want the black people who were part of the empire descending to help because they were black.
What? Can I just interrupt, Rose? It's actually the opposite way around. I don't understand why, if Britain hadn't got enough workforce, then 1 million people, 1 million white British people, were given tickets to go to Australia, and presumably well, let's suppose an equal number went to Canada, and maybe perhaps slightly lesser number went to New Zealand and South Africa as well. That the drain of workers from Britain at the time was really significant, but that was government driven, and I don't understand that. No wonder we needed as many people from other parts of the Commonwealth to bolster the services, etc. It's quite
sorry,
bizarre.
Liz, it is bizarre, because when I did all my research for a couple of my books, and I looked at who was on various ships, and I'm not talking about the Windrush alone, but other ships, that came in subsequently, they were from Canada, they were from they were from all over. So yeah, there were tensions. You had one lot, the 10-pounders, and they were being, because we want to have this sort of white policy, as you said, but so there was all sorts of stuff swirling around at the same time,
weird.
as Churchill was saying, we'll have them for a bit, but actually we don't want them to stay. And in the papers it's clear what he said. So and since then, though, what I have found interesting as a historian is how many changes there have been to the immigration laws to reinforce that. And we only have to look at the political scene at the moment, not just internationally, please, in Europe, in America, in Austria, in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Belgium, Greece. Look at it, and look at what's happening in the UK now. And I don't know. I don't know where we're going with all of
it. The thing is, Rose, you've made some really factual points. Last night there was the debate with the seven, and you notice what Nigel Farage was saying, right? They want a nil immigration policy, right? That's what we're saying. And of course, we've seen this, how race has been used, and not just in this country, across Europe. You're quite right, across Europe and also in America. We've seen that. But let me just go back to a couple of points that you mentioned about your parents, and because I also had the blue passport, the dark blue passport as well, that came on. But this is the bit what people don't quite understand, because they have a passport that says they were British, and they say it's visible, here it is, I can show it to you, yes. But then your country became independent on this date. So now, right, what was applicable is no longer applicable. And what we don't fully appreciate, since 1948 Immigration Act, the different pieces of immigration that came in. And let's be clear, British people is not subject to immigration control. They don't, that's not applicable to them. It is done purely to control people coming into the UK. And in particular, dark-skinned people coming into the UK. That is clear. There's no question. Tim O'Brien said it all the time on LBC. It's quite clear. It's open, and it's there. So 1962, there was another piece of legislation, the same year that Jamaica had independence. Then 1968, there was another piece of legislation. Then 1971, there was another piece of legislation that was enacted 73. And it's the 71 piece of legislation that has a greater impact on the Windrush generation. And now, we've gone through the years, and since Brexit, we've had subsequent pieces of Nationality Act, etc. All of this is designed purely to control how many people come into the UK from particular countries. And we know this is the case because June Elizabeth and I, we've worked on this with Nigeria. The Home Office discriminates openly with a lot of Nigerian application for Windrush. And we don't know why, but they're doing it. Yeah. And we were successful in bringing a Nigerian family from Nigeria back to the UK after trying for many years, could not return. So the policy is so clear. The policy is correct. This is, and they don't deny it. You know, that's what it is. Yeah. However, for us, you know, and for a lot of the older generation, right, they always believed they were British, and you couldn't tell them anything different. And a lot of them had refused to even go down the naturalization route. They said, I was British from I was born. So why would I want to do that and pay money to do this?
Well, in a way, Garrick, it's a little bit like the shock and horror that I experienced when I had to replace my British passport, because I had a European passport before, and I was a proud European.
Yes.
And to lose my European status was a big deal for me. So yes, it's something that people, you know, now perhaps understand, that they need to understand what these immigration rules are.
Absolutely.
You don't happen to know what year it was when they changed the law about when you were, because I used to believe, I thought quite firmly, if you were born in the UK, you were British. I really believe that. I don't know what year that was changed.
But that relates,
you know,
that relates to a grandparents. You know, in order for you to actually track your Britishness, you have to have a grandparents who were already born and settled.
But I thought, and I truly believe, that if you were born in Britain, then you were British. Rose, do you know anything more about that?
I think, and I say this, it was the year my second son was born, because I remember thinking I must deal with this issue now of naturalization, because he was born in 1983, and I'm married to a British person, right? And before that, he would have been protected by his father's Britishness. And I think he probably would still. But I remember thinking, come on, Justin, I've now got you. I have to deal with me. Because I want to make sure that you are protected. You know, and of course, I mean, intellectually, of course, I knew that because his father was British, it was likely, right, that it would be okay. But I remember reading about all of these issues at the time and thinking, come on, get it sorted, girl, get it sorted. And telling everybody I knew exactly what you're saying about some of the things you're talking about now, Garrick and June Elizabeth. Get yourselves naturalized, get your act together, find out the passport, because my brother, who's online at the minute, Earl, was on my passport. And I was a child when I came.
Right.
So he and my sister traveled on my passport.
Yes.
And so we were having to find the old passport from way back. And so they could actually sort out their bits and pieces as well. So it's very real. It's very real. And I think your point about, the various immigration acts, I think there is some work to be done to, when you say, Liz, about we need to understand that this is the reality for us. I think there's some work to be done to educate everybody on, make sure you keep a good close set of records which are based on fact. You hang on, in a sense, hang on to the archive, because remember the Windrush lot, at one point they'd lost the records, supposedly.
Destroy.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it wasn't the Tories, if you remember.
That's right, correct.
So, there is a reality about the way we live our lives, that we have to be different in the way we record, and keep and archive.
I think it's really,
it's sad.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because if you think about my circumstance, and I was challenged about losing my European status, then I wouldn't have kept records to prove I was a European, because why would I? I was
Yeah,
one.
there's no need.
Do you
There's
know
no
what I
need.
mean?
Mm.
But we need to.
Right. Yeah, well,
We need to.
we do. It's really, really unfair and discriminatory. I think
Yeah.
we've established
And
that.
just before
Right.
Julie Elizabeth comes in, Riz, and this is quite important. You know, I mentioned the 2-year rule where a person was locked out. For European, yeah, and this is in the legislation. For European, you can be away from the UK for 5 years. 5 years and return, no consequence. Yes, 5 years. But for us, 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've got to be cautious of here in Australia, but they let me back into the UK last year, so perhaps they will this year, hopefully. June Elizabeth, if you'd like to have a little wrap up of what you wanted to say, then we'll just go around the screen and then we'll finish. And Earl, you've been with us all this time. It's great. And Simon's, I think, had to nip off, but Simon would definitely be campaigning about the discrimination against things since Brexit. June Elizabeth.
Right. Very briefly, if you remember when the Asians came in because of Mr.
Idi Amin.
Idi Amin.
Yeah.
They all got British passports, no problem. They weren't born here.
Correct.
That's one point. The second point is, I've done an immigration course. You have to get to level 2 to be able to give immigration advice.
Yeah.
But why I didn't bother after I did the one is because they said that anytime a new law came in for immigration, they used to put it in alphabetical order. But now they're coming so furious and fast that they can't keep up. They just put it straight in the back.
Yeah.
Okay. So that shows you something. On Monday, I gave a presentation to New Scotland Yard on my birthday. And when I ended, I showed them my mum and dad's passport, the British subject one, 1954, that they came on, to show them that's how come I'm here. Right. And then tomorrow, I am going to go to the unveiling of Equiano's memorial in London.
Yeah.
So that's my update.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I don't think Equiano came over on the Windrush, did he?
I emailed Juanita. Yes.
Yeah.
And she's looking forward to being on the platform in 2 weeks.
Okay.
She wanted to know what you're doing at the fire station, but I said, you'll tell her about that.
All right. Just while we're talking about Juanita, I'm just to say what excellent work Justice for Windrush Generations are doing, and what excellent work June Elizabeth and the other ambassadors of Windrush are doing. And Garrick, thank you so much for sharing today and going through it again so patiently and in so much detail. And I know June Elizabeth and Garrick, no, this is something coming up in Ipswich,
next Saturday.
Next Saturday. I know you're doing so much at the moment, but this was about Juanita Cox's presentation. Now, she's done this 3-year project, and I was going to ask you, June Elizabeth, because you might know. So it's a unique study of the Windrush scandal in Britain in the context of UK, Caribbean and Commonwealth transnational relations. Now, has Juanita, in that research, did she look mainly at the Caribbean communities' challenges that they've faced, or did she look at the wider, however many countries there are in the Commonwealth basis? Do you know?
But I do believe she concentrated on the Caribbean, but she did open her research up to the wider, because of the people that she interviewed.
So when Juanita comes to talk, and this is going to be an overview of the project and the research, etc., etc. There we are in Rhyl with the fire service, and this is the fire service of the whole of North Wales, but they very much are of the view that this is a celebration event. They've booked the food, they've booked the steel band, and it goes back to the point I was making, that there's so many complex cross messages going on now about what we're doing. Yes, we want to recognise very much the wonderful contribution that people from the Caribbean and descendants of people from the Caribbean have made, and that's really important in its own right. I mean, there aren't so many people from St Helena or wherever some of the other Commonwealth countries are. It was really the Commonwealth countries that I don't know, I'd have to look through the list and see, but yes, it's a complex one, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to handle it.
It is a complex one, Liz, but you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the fact is, many of us don't really agree about Windrush celebration, because you know, we know about the achievement of many people from the Commonwealth and their contribution to British society, etc. But while this issue is still affecting thousands of people and families, it is nothing to celebrate. So we always emphasize the point that Windrush is still affecting thousands of people. So in real, you know, we will certainly want to get a particular message across, you know, to the community, but also, you know, we don't want people to go away and think, well, you know, we've supported a Windrush Day celebration and that's the end of that. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, and even getting people to come out and you know, come forward, because people are scared. People are very fearful of coming out, identifying themselves, because they don't know what the consequence of this will be. People tell me, they ask me questions about, you know, what if I do this? And some of the questions I can't answer, because that's a Home Office issue. I could not speak for the Home Office. No, so we always make it clear, Garrick, you know, to people, we're here to help them and to support them, but there are real issues with the way the Home Office is doing and you know, administering this thing. And this is why we've been pushing for the scheme to be removed from the Home Office to an independent organization, right? And you know, all that is in place, but at the moment it's still with the Home Office. We're hoping that you know, sometime with the new government, that those issues will be taken seriously and it will be moved out of the Home Office.
Right, well, and I would hope a new government would manage the Home Office better, but that's a very good point. Okay then, so I'm just going to ask a practical question here. Garrick, because you weren't able to meet this team, and we've got this event that we're supporting, is there any chance that you could go to Rhyl on Monday morning to meet with them?
Yes, because I missed that meeting. Let me just have a quick look.
Sorry,
what time, Liz?
Practical. I don't think they've set a time yet, but it wouldn't be.
I can avail myself. If there is no set time,
I think it would be very helpful if you could do that and meet up with them
as a pre-meeting,
so that we've got it sorted, because I wasn't able to stay for the whole of the meeting that they had. Anyway, enough of the practicalities about our event in Rhyl, but if you join us at that opportunity, it'll be very interesting. We're going to start at 2:30 with the Mayor of Maypen and members of the fire service in Maypen, because we want to also bring the story of getting a reconditioned fire engine for them into it. So we're going to be doing that. So it should be quite an interesting session. And then we'll also hear about the work that Juanita's done. Earl, you've been very quiet. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, if you've been patiently listening and you're still there.
The things I want to add is listening to my sister there, is I've just realized that my son, who was born in 79, and I got my citizenship in 82, may not be legal, listening to some of the details of the scheme. He was born in Northampton, of all places. Oh, sorry, Bedford. Bedford South Wing Hospital. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It
Well,
could
I
be
think
something, Earl, that June Elizabeth, because prior, in order to track your Britishness or your line of Britishness, it was the grandmother. Before it is now the male and female, so it can go either way. So prior to that, it was just the grandmother, the female line. Now it can be either male or female line.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, I understand that element, but I'm just saying, from the point of view that my son was born in 79, while I fell within the option to get my British citizenship at a cost, and I got mine in 82, but he was already, he was the named citizen.
yeah.
Because he was born in 79.
Yeah.
When I got my certificate, it's from myself and my wife.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who was subsequently born, would definitely then be citizen.
What year did you arrive in the UK, Earl?
65, isn't it, Rose?
Well, you're a Commonwealth, so you know 65. You come on you were here before 73.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were here. So your child
Can
born
I just
after that
mention
is not a big issue.
Can I just mention that we are still recording, and I can't stop the recording of this?
No, that's fine. It's fine.
We have to stop it all. So I don't want you to be saying anything that you would feel. But this is just the sort of point we're talking about,
Yes.
Earl, that it can be anybody, because it's so complex. You just can't see. So I'm sure that Garrick will help you on that, and Rose, obviously, with your brother.
And that is why, Liz, that's why we suggest people to make contact with our advocates. So if they have a query, something they're not sure about, just reach out to our advocates, and they will help. And just a bit of good news, Liz, just before we finish. From September this year, Liverpool John Moore University Law Clinic, we will have access to 40 new legal advisors who will be working on Windrush. So we have access to 40 students from September. And both myself and Tanika, we will be delivering training to the law student who will be taking on these cases in Liverpool.
That's just amazing, amazing. So, Earl, can you do you need Garrick's contact details? Would that help?
Yeah, I did put my email address on the last one.
Yeah, Liz can always send it to me, Liz. If you've got
that
it.
might be a bit adventurous. Rose, just share.
Yeah, so I'll share with
address.
I share. I think
Garrick's address with Earl.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think I've got Garrick.
I'm gonna put it in the chat now.
Okay. The only reason I'm saying don't rely on me to find anything at the minute, Earl, is that I've changed laptops since last week.
No problem. No problems at all. No problem
Anyway,
at all.
It's great that you joined us again, though, Earls, and it could be that it's really important you joined us again. So it's Garrick Prayogg, all one word, @gmail.com. Garrick, thank you so much, and we're going to wrap up now. June Elizabeth, thank you for adding your interesting pieces in too, and also Rose, she's taken a photograph of that, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions too, and also Earl, thank you for being with us and coming in with that at the last minute. So thanks very much indeed. And next week, hopefully, June Elizabeth, we've got 2 of the nurses coming from the Jamaica Nurses Association. Have I
Yeah,
got the
they said
terminology right?
they said they would send their picture and their bio
Right.
today. Yeah.
Okay, well, if you pass it on to me, I've got a couple of days before I fly. All right,
Yes,
Rose.
okay.
It's only a quickie related to next week. One of the people whose stories I have written about was 102 on Saturday, and she
Oh.
was a nurse, June Elizabeth.
Oh,
And I'm trying to get her daughter to get her online next Friday.
that
Wow.
would be fantastic.
Oh,
Right,
that'd be
we'll
lovely.
interrupt anything for that.
Oh,
That's just
yes,
amazing.
yes.
That's
So I thought I'd
amazing. Oh,
Very
good.
nice.
Well done, Rose. And you did so well last the week that we had the teachers. It was just amazing. Okay, then, folks. Thanks very much indeed. Then,
Okay, all right. Have a nice
all
afternoon.
the very best to you, and
okay.
Have a
I'll
safe
see
travel.
you next
Safe-
week. Thank you very
safe
much
travel.
indeed. Thank you.
Safe
Yeah, she'll be
travel.
all right.
Bye
Yeah,
then.
she's on a special
travel.
flight. Special flight. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Quick
Safe
10-minute
travel, my
one.
love.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take
Thanks,
care.
and
Bye-bye.
thanks,
Bye.
Garrick,
Bye,
very
love.
much indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.